come to order. Thank you all. And pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, May 9th, Bill C-44, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 22nd, 2017, and other measures. We're fortunate to be able to have the Minister, Bill Morneau, here this morning, and with him as witnesses from the Department of Finance, Paul Rochon, Deputy Minister, and Andrew Marsland, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Tax Policy Branch. Welcome, gentlemen. And just to for information of the committee, we do know there's likely going to be a call for votes. There will be a 30-minute bell. We will stay till about 7 minutes left on that bell, and the Minister has agreed to come back following the vote to give us a full hour of his commitment to committee. So with that, Minister, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Honourable colleagues, c'est pour moi un grand plaisir de vous parler aujourd'hui.
It's truly a great pleasure for me here today to tell you about Bill C-44 to implement provisions of the budget.
Of the government's plan to strengthen and grow the middle class and all those working hard to join it. It will allow the government to continue making the smart investments that will create jobs, grow our economy, and provide more opportunities for the middle class. The steps we've taken to date are having a real and positive impact on our economy and on Canadians. Over the past year, the economy created over 250,000 new jobs, the large majority of which were in full-time positions and in the private sector. And forecasters are expecting Canada's economy to grow even faster over the next 2 years. We understand that despite these positive signs, people are still anxious about the future. Canadians want to be assured that their hard work will mean a better future for their children and for their grandchildren. Nous devons montrer par l'action que le
We need to show by taking action that we hear their concerns and that we are ready to take the necessary measures to help them succeed. That is why we have gathered here today to examine and discuss about the important measures in Bill C-44 and to reach consensus, as Canadians expect of us, on issues that count the most.
Knowledgeable on the contents of this bill, I want to begin by highlighting a few measures that I know are top of mind for the committee. First, we've taken steps to strengthen the Parliamentary Budget Office to make it truly independent. C-44 recast the head of the PBO as an officer of Parliament, supported by a team that's separate from the Library of Parliament and with the authority to report directly to Parliament. Our plan will ensure that the PBO will have expanded right of access to government information and a new mandate to provide costing of platform proposals during elections. Honourable members, we need to get this right. Le travail du directeur parlementaire du
work of the Parliamentary Budget Officer is truly essential to Parliament's ability to debate and examine in depth the economic issues and the financial issues that are relevant to Canada. This will help us respect higher levels of behaviour and to really work based on facts.
Concerns. We're open to your views. In fact, we depend on them. I want to turn now to one of the best ways we can bring confidence back to the middle class, investing in public infrastructure to build stronger communities. Our government's laid out an historic plan to invest more than $180 billion in infrastructure over the next 12 years. But no order of government can accomplish ambitious goals for infrastructure alone. Investors have told us that they want to invest in Canada. Et comme vous le savez bien, notre pays,
as you know well, our Canada is in great need of infrastructure investments and has an infinite potential for creating world-class architecture and infrastructure. That's why Bill C-44 implements and creates the Canada Infrastructure Bank under the Canada Infrastructure Bank Act as a Crown Corporation.
To build world-class infrastructure that will transform communities, create good jobs, and build a stronger and greener economy and ensure that more of the infrastructure needed by Canadians gets built. Canadians today will benefit from good, well-paying jobs, and Canadians tomorrow will enjoy the advantages of good roads, bridges, transit, and social infrastructure built to meet their needs and help their communities thrive. Looking beyond bricks and mortar, people really are at the heart of our plan. So I want to address a few measures this bill that speak directly to our highest priority, the middle class and all those working hard to join it. Le gouvernement s'est fermement engagé à...
Government has truly undertaken to help Canadians of all ages to receive the training, to be able to acquire the abilities and skills they need to succeed in today's and tomorrow's economies. And that is why, in this bill, you will find various measures which aim to help Canadians take training no matter what period of their life they are in.
First job is a great job, and that their next job is a better job. That's why we're taking steps to help working parents who must balance the demands of raising a family while managing their own career needs in this time of transition. Bill C-44 would allow parents to choose to receive EI parental benefits over an extended period of up to 18 months at a lower benefit rate of 33% of average weekly earnings. And it also proposes to do more to provide greater flexibility to pregnant working women, giving them the option of claiming EI maternity benefits up to 12 weeks before their due date, expanded from the current standard of 8 weeks, if they so choose. Budget 2017 also takes action to support those who have put their lives on the line to make Canada a safe and secure place to live. After putting themselves in harm's way in service to our country, our women and men in uniform deserve a successful transition to civilian life. To help, we'll create a new education and training benefit. This benefit will provide more money for veterans to go to college, university, or a technical school after they complete their service. But I want to stress that we understand the job is not yet complete. Veterans and stakeholders have told us that the existing suite of programs is complex and difficult and stressful to navigate, and that simply isn't good enough. We intend to take additional action to streamline and simplify the system of financial support programs currently offered to veterans over the coming months. And that will include fulfilling our commitment to reestablish lifelong pensions as an option for injured veterans so that veterans and their families can decide for themselves which form of compensation works best. To conclude, the bill before us has concrete measures that move Canada forward as a smart and caring nation. But we can and will do more. Alors que nous continuons de mettre l'accent sur la croissance,
we continue to focus on growth, but we will not do so to the detriment of other essential issues. We will see to it that Canadians as a whole take advantage of future growth, not only the rich or the well-positioned, and we will help ensure that families can foresee the future of their children and grandchildren with true optimism.
And to work with us on those portions of it that can benefit from your own views and ideas, so that at the end of the day, we meet the high standards and expectations that Canadians have of us. Before I finally conclude, I'd like to just give you a preview of some of the issues we're looking to address over the coming months. Our government believes every Canadian needs to pay their fair share of taxes, and in the coming weeks and months, I'll be laying out our plan to ensure greater tax fairness. Build basis accounting, for example, will be brought forward as part of the next Budget Implementation Act, which will provide the opportunity for the committee to consider in detail the legislative proposals for this measure. I know this is a topic that spurred much discussion, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. We're also examining tax planning strategies involving the use of private corporations. As announced in Budget 2017, we will release a paper setting out the issues of this in detail, as well as proposed policy responses. And while I'm on the subject of taxation, I know members will have questions about our plans to tax the future legal sale of cannabis. Work has begun on the design of this taxation regime, and the issue will be on the agenda at the next meeting of provincial and territorial finance ministers in June. The goal will be to agree on some basic principles with the intent to move quickly on these historic legislative proposals. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister, and also thank you for giving us an idea what future thinking might be in some other areas for future budget. It gives us an opportunity to think of that in advance. Going to 5-minute rounds, then Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Minister. Welcome back from your trip overseas as well. Thank you for those opening remarks. Minister, I've described our budget, both last year's in 16 and 17, as a budget of having a 3-pillar approach where we undertake investments in innovation, skills training, and lifelong learning, as well as infrastructure. With that all in terms of growing the economy, a stronger middle class. But one of the issues that we face in Canada is our demographics. We have an aging workforce, and we have a lot of people retiring, and we need to look at avenues to increase participation rates among certain classes of workers. I fundamentally think that is going to be one way that we increase the long-term economic growth rate of our economy is to bring in underrepresented or groups of workers that may not be at levels where they can be, and that we can undertake certain measures. As a father of 2 young daughters, I want to ensure that women in the labor force are representative or at equal levels as men are. And I think our government's undertaken a number of measures, but I want to hear from you just how important it is for us, specifically in the budget, Chapter 5, a gender statement for the first time ever, that we encourage labor force participation rates to increase and how important it is for economic growth.
Well, Francesco, let me start by saying that this is a hugely important issue for our country, and the kind of advocacy that you've had on this issue, both at this committee and more broadly in the House of Commons, really has brought this issue to the forefront. So we know that demographic challenges specifically are going to be one of the biggest issues that we face in the next generation. And we know that for your daughters and for so many other women in this country and young women, that their participation is going to be critically important to ensuring that we're successful. In thinking about that specific issue, we know that we have a 9% lower workforce participation rate among working age women than we do among working age men. And as we think about ways to make sure that our economy is successful, we need to think about how we can enable people to be in the workforce if they choose to be in the workforce. And so all of our measures that we put in our first budget and in our second budget that have thought about this issue have been geared to making it more likely that women are going to be successful in the workforce. So starting with the way we took a look at child benefits, of course, that was a very important first step by giving significantly more child benefits to lower and middle income families, knowing that that helps women in particular, especially women, single women. What we did in this budget, there's a number of things that are going to make an important difference. Focus on early learning and childcare by putting significant funds into early learning and childcare. That's going to make a difference for families. The biggest burden of childcare often falls on the woman, as in many cases the primary caregiver. Enabling women to have better childcare options is going to help with workforce participation. But we've moved forward on a number of other things. You heard me in my remarks talk about making parental leave more flexible, recognizing that different families have different needs, enabling people to make the right choice for their family, looking at things as specific as how we can help women entrepreneurs to be more successful can make a difference in terms of allowing people to see their potential opportunities in the workforce. All of these things are part of a broader plan on dealing with what's critically important, enabling women to be successful, and at the same time having a really positive economic impact. So Thank you again for your question. It's one that's central to our government's efforts.
You're welcome.
Quick question and a very quick answer.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Investing in Canada, investing in Canadians is of paramount importance to make sure we have a thriving economy and people have the right skill set for an evolving economy, and which is obviously changing all the time. I would like to follow up on and just change tangent on the tax fairness, tax avoidance measures that we've put a lot of funds into CRA for the last the 2 years. In terms of what are our expectations out of that? The way I look at it is we need to ensure Canadians and organizations pay their fair share of taxes. But what's our overall theme in terms of the government's focus on that initiative?
Minister, and you're allowed to sum up fairly quickly.
Well, thanks again. This is central to our government. We want to make sure that we have a system that's fair and also that people are paying their fair share based on that system. So the kinds of resources we gave to the Canada Revenue Agency were critical to make sure that happened. At our first budget, we gave over $400 million in additional funds to CRA so they could make sure people were actually paying the amount that they were due to pay. We saw that as a very successful effort to make sure that people were doing that. It actually paid dividends in terms of people paying their fair share. So in Budget 2017, we moved forward again to put more money for CRA so that they could enforce the rules in the fairest way across our country. It will have a positive impact on government revenues by ensuring that people are paying their fair share. That's a continuing approach that we'll take as we think about not only closing loopholes, but once we have the system, making sure that people actually do what we expect them to do, and that's to pay their taxes.
Thank you,
Minister.
thank you both. Mr. Poilievre, welcome to Finance Committee.
Thank you. On the Infrastructure Bank, Division 18, Sub-Clause 22.2 of your budget bill says, and I quote, "The Minister of Finance, on the recommendation of the designated minister, may make a loan or provide a loan guarantee with respect to the infrastructure project." If you loan, say, $1 billion of taxpayers' money to a company to build infrastructure, and that company goes bankrupt, who will repay Canadian taxpayers their $1 billion?
Mr. Minister?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for bringing up the Canada Infrastructure Bank. We believe that this institution will enable us to produce more infrastructure across this country than would be the case if we didn't put it in place.
And who would repay the $1 billion?
What we look towards doing is thinking about how we can attract additional money into infrastructure, projects that wouldn't otherwise get done. So the institution will be able to use the $15 billion of money we've put from our $180 billion over the next 10 years, as well as use the $20 billion in capital that the institution will have to make projects work. The specifics
and the loans would be an example of the capital. So the question was, if you loaned $1 billion for an infrastructure project, the borrower went bankrupt, as often happens, as happened to a builder in South End, Ottawa, who will repay taxpayers their $1 billion?
I want to thank you for the additional clarity, but I did understand the question.
Nobody can understand your answer because you're not giving one yet.
I'd like to answer. So the bank will be able to have specific projects that it supports in terms of concessional capital or in the terms of loans or loan guarantees. They're good examples.
And who would repay it? If the builder goes bankrupt?
Pierre,
I'm happy to answer your question if you'd like.
Any time, we're ready for it.
Okay, if you have more to say, go ahead. I'll wait.
Okay, well, I'll move on to the same clause in the budget bill gives you the power to offer loan guarantees for a company building infrastructure. That will make the taxpayer the guarantor of a loan. If a company gets a taxpayer guarantee for $1 billion project and fails to repay that $1 billion loan, who will repay it?
Floor is yours, Minister.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Are you ready for me to answer?
Well, we've been waiting for you to answer for the duration, so any time now. Who will repay the money?
What I was about to say was that in each project there'll be specific situations. So in many cases there'll be security behind that loan. So the security behind the loan would mean that if, in the case that you identified, that an organization wasn't able to repay the loan, the security would come back for the federal government in that case. So what I can't do is give you every specific project right now. But what I can do is tell... Again, would you like me to answer the question or not?
The question is who would repay it?
The minister is answering your question. Give him time to answer it instead of interrupting.
Do you understand the concept of security behind a loan?
I do. In fact, Chapter 2 of your budget touches on that. It says that you will use subordinated debt. According to Investopedia, subordinated debt is more risky than unsubordinated debt. Subordinated debt is considered any type of loan that is repaid after other corporate debts and loans are repaid in the case of borrower default. That means that the debt owed to taxpayers would not be secured. The senior debt would be secured. So you're factually wrong. You're contradicting your own budget documents. It would not be secured.
Well, actually, you're confused and you're inaccurate.
You've been asked 4 times who would pay back the taxpayer. So if a builder takes a $1 billion loan from your taxpayer-backed infrastructure bank and goes bankrupt, who would repay taxpayers? A, no one. B, the Tooth Fairy. Or C, would you take it out of your personal retirement funds? Who would repay taxpayers?
So, Minister, we are going to give you time to answer that question, and your time's up, Mr. Poilievre. Go ahead.
I appreciate the opportunity to reply. So the good design that we've put in place for the Canada Infrastructure Bank would allow us to create an agency with expertise around how you can deliver on complex financial arrangements to make sure that significant infrastructure projects actually get done. That would mean that what's required is not only seeking institutional investors, but considering the possibility of also finding ways to ensure that projects get done that might require loans or in some cases loan guarantees. We've given the bank flexibility to do that. Of course, we'll be relying on the expertise of this agency in order to make sure that they do this on commercially successful terms, as we do with other Canadian government organizations like the Business Development Bank, like the Export Development Corporation, that are very successful in terms of not only being able to provide loans, but being able to provide returns to the Canadian government through those loans. That's what we expect would happen in this case. We will be able to do more infrastructure through crowding in private sector investment. We'll be able to create structures that provide financing opportunities that allow us to get more done while creating better outcomes for Canadians, both through jobs and through long-term better infrastructure and a low level of financial risk.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Dussault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
5 minutes, Pierre.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, pour votre...
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Honourable Minister, for being with us here. I would like to go on about the Infrastructure Bank, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which, of course, has been much spoken of since Bill C-44 saw the day, and of course was discussed even before that. Now there is the committees, the Economic Growth Advisory Committee's report, and it would seem that you pretty much made a copy and paste use of it in Bill C-44. Now, among the people who helped produce the report, of course there are many, but one in particular mentioned that the infrastructure projects, well, the aim of them was to lead to revenue of 7 to 9%. Now, can you confirm that the Infrastructure Bank will be structured to provide investors with a 7 to 9% return? Can you confirm these figures by mentioned by people who have an interest in this matter? Thank you for your question. True, we had an expert panel to help us structure our decisions and our measures to improve economic growth. The panel, of course, included experts from across our nation, including many Quebecers, and their work was most important to us. They helped us find ways to better invest in our infrastructure, to carry out projects in Montreal, for example. Public transit, very important for the community. Also, giving people more work, more jobs, all that counts. Each project will, of course, be singular, have its own structure, so I can't tell you exactly how each project will look once it's up and running, but let me give you a good example. The public transit in Montreal, we know that it's possible to call on institutional investors and help them create a truly transformative project that will help people in Montreal, make it easier to offer jobs. And so that's really essential. That's what we're aiming for. Will there be returns? Can you tell us what the returns will be? 7 to 9%, 5%, 3%? Can you provide us with any details about the return on investment that people will have invested in these projects, will have helped create this bank, advise on the bank? They're expecting a certain return on potential investments, and what would that be? Allow me to begin by explaining that there is no guaranteed level of return on investment. Each project will have its own structure and style. If a project is a high-risk project, of course, normally speaking, there should be more possibility of a return on the investment. But a low-risk program would probably offer less return on investment. So I can't tell you exactly what will happen in each project, but what I can say in general, and I'm quite certain of this, is that with this new Canada Infrastructure Bank, we will be in a better position to do more for Canadians, including Quebecers. We'll have more projects, more money flowing into infrastructure projects, more jobs, more projects that will help render our economy more productive long into the future. Thank you. Well, on the whole issue of generating revenue, that being the main purpose of the bank, at Section 6 of the Act regarding the bank, we read that these should be revenue-generating infrastructure projects, and that's really laid out in Section 6 of the Canada Infrastructure Bank Act. Can you tell us how that would work?
And also how the infrastructure that will be built will be able to generate revenue. I can begin by explaining that you haven't understood at all the objective of infrastructure in our country. Yes, but the whole point of the mission and of the exercise, is it not, to generate revenue? Can you give me a concrete example? The goal of the bank is to provide more infrastructure in our country, to help our country be more productive, to help more work to be done. That's the goal. But I can explain to you at the same time that we will find projects where there is a possibility of revenue to be invested, that's sure, for sure. Or we will look for a project where there is a possibility of revenue generation, where there is a source of revenue. And that will give the possibility for investors to have a project that will work for them and at the same time help the city of Montreal, for example, help the people of Montreal, for example, to find more jobs in Montreal. So that is a very good example of what we can do more with the Infrastructure Bank. Pierre?
We're considerably over. We went over on all three questioners a little bit in balance. So we will have to suspend for the vote. Coming back, we'll have time for 5 questioners, Ms. O'Connell, Mr. Albaz, Mr. Greywall, Mr. Leipert, and Mr. Badway. So we will suspend until after the votes. Okay, we will reconvene, and thank you all for making quick work of a vote. Still on, we'll go to continue with 5-minute rounds. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. I want to speak about agriculture, and in particular, your economic advisory panel, when we heard from them, and I believe it was their second report, outlined Canada's potential and opportunity for agriculture growth and agri-food growth. So I was extremely happy today when in my riding, Transport Canada has released a new Pickering agricultural lease renewal strategy, something that hadn't been updated in more than 20 years. And for 40 years, prime Class 1 farmland being underutilized in my riding of Pickering. And today, finally allowing the types of investments in agriculture in my community through 10-year leases beginning in 2018. Something that will allow farmers to actually plan out crops and properly work towards the types of investments they need. So could you maybe elaborate on, in Budget 2017, the types of investments and the priorities around agriculture?
Well, thank you for that question, Jennifer. And let me start by saying that the work in your riding in particular, the work around the Pickering Agricultural Lease Renewal Strategy is going to have a huge impact. And I know that your advocacy in that regard is going to make a real difference for farmers in your riding. For us, more broadly across the country, obviously focusing on where Canada has a comparative advantage is critically important. Our Advisory Council on Economic Growth really looked at the places where in our country we have already an advantage and have the possibility for making additional investments to really improve our standing internationally. The agricultural sector is an obvious one, looking at the possibility to expand on an already successful area of export is important. That's why we move forward with measures to help that sector. Our broad approach will be to think about how we can make farmers more effective now and how we can ensure that there's policies that allow our agricultural sector to be successful in future. We know that this will provide us with real opportunity moving forward across the country and obviously in places where we have big farming communities like your riding.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I also want to talk about, I was going to talk about the infrastructure bank, but I think we've heard a lot about that. I want to make sure in my amount of time that we touch on healthcare. Last Thursday, this committee had hearings, and we were talking about the mental health investments in particular. And I wanted to talk about in this budget those investments in healthcare and the work that you're doing and the other ministers, Minister Philpott, for example, in working with provinces and territories to ensure that, for example, mental health is being addressed across this country?
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's quite helpful because we haven't spent enough time, I don't think, talking about the significant healthcare investments in Budget 2017. In getting to what was really a cooperative way to work with the provinces, we've set ourselves up for continuing success in health care over the longer term. We know that Canadians would like to see more significant investments in some specific places where there are big challenges, and the two that we identified were mental health and in home care. So the agreements that we came to allow us to continue our approach to be a partner with the provinces in healthcare, broadly speaking, but also to focus our efforts in those areas. In the mental health area, which you referenced, what's going to happen now is that Minister Philpott, Department of Health, will be working together with the provinces to ensure that we actually have a measurable impact on mental health in the provinces by identifying what actions and what investments each province will make that will have an impact on improving mental health outcomes in the province. The significant investment we've made will make a real difference for people across the country in an area where we know that so many people are challenged.
Thank you. Do I have time?
You got time for a quick one.
Okay.
Very quick.
I will get back to the infrastructure bank because I couldn't not, given my past background in municipal government. For me, the infrastructure bank, the feedback I've heard from mayors and municipalities is in regards to the ability for projects that might never have been able to be completed. And I'll give you an example from my riding. Transit, right? In my community, it's a suburban community for Toronto. A lot of people work in Toronto, and having transit that crosses borders can be quite difficult. Can you maybe elaborate on the infrastructure bank and the opportunities to have these really transformational types of infrastructure that maybe one municipality or one area couldn't have done alone?
I think this is a particularly important thing to think about with the Canada Infrastructure Bank. We've identified that we have significant infrastructure needs in our country, more significant than any one level of government can get at. In fact, we believe more significant that all levels of government can get at even together. So although we're making a very enormous investment, $180 billion over a dozen years in infrastructure, and even with the additional investment of municipalities and provinces, which will increase that amount, there'll still be projects that won't get done. And they won't get done for a number of reasons. One will be that they might just be too big for any level of government to take on. Another might be, as you suggest, that as we go through the traditional way of identifying projects, which often come from municipalities through to provinces for consideration, the ones that go past one municipality into multiple municipalities might not actually get highest on the list of things to do. By looking at projects that are bigger, that transcend boundaries, that display the opportunities for successful investment, we can actually get things done that might not otherwise get done. The kind of project you're talking about might be a perfect example. Transit, like you're talking about, will often have revenue opportunities attached to it. It will require big investments of multiple jurisdictions, and it's very susceptible to creating opportunities for outside investors. So I think that's the sort of project that we'll get at together with our new bank and provinces, municipalities that we might not get at otherwise.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. O'Connell. Mr. Albas, slightly more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for you and your deputies to be here today. Certainly appreciate your presence. I would like to just to touch on the infrastructure bank. Obviously, it probably should be called an infrastructure corporation because it won't be providing banking services, so to speak. But, Minister, just in context of this, right now I'm hearing from insurance companies that say the new OSFI's capital requirements for them to invest in Canadian infrastructure is going the opposite direction of the rhetoric of your government. They're saying that right now, that of January 2018, that the new capital requirements actually make it more difficult for Canadian insurance companies who have traditionally invested billions, I think $70 billion in Canadian infrastructure. Can you explain why you are so gung-ho on an infrastructure bank that basically is to attract foreign investment, while at the same time actually making it more difficult for Canadian companies to invest in Canadian infrastructure?
Well, thank you for the question. I think this is actually a useful thing for us to talk about. The two things you're bringing up we see as entirely separate. So as we think about the capital requirements for banks and for insurance companies, what we're thinking about in that regard is what are the requirements that those institutions need in order to protect the people that are, in the case of banks, putting their deposits with a bank, or in the case of insurance companies, people that are buying policies. The reason we expect capital requirements to be there is because we want to make sure that banks or insurance companies have the long-term sustainability that they need in order to pay out those depositors or those policyholders when the time is due. So that is the sole way that we're going to look at those capital requirements. With respect to the way those institutions decide to invest their money, that will be based on those capital requirements that they have. So that's the approach. Now,
So
this is,
when-
to the second part of your question, the Canada Infrastructure Bank is an entirely different body. This body is not a body for which there will be depositors in that classic sense or policy holders. Instead, its goal is to increase the amount of infrastructure investment that goes on by using outside capital to come in on a project-by-project basis.
So that outside capital, though, Minister, and this goes back to Mr. Poilievre's point earlier, is that they won't be subject to the same rules about how much capital that they need to have in reserves. Is that correct? They won't be bound by the same rules that we're going to be expecting of insurance companies come January 2018.
That is absolutely correct. We're talking about two very separate things. So an insurance company's capital requirements rules are based on the actual goal of that institution, and our goal as the prudential regulator of those institutions is thinking about protecting those people within it. The Canada Infrastructure Bank is actually looking to do something quite different.
So if you can't make sure that there is proper reserves for those companies that will be investing in these projects, Minister, what happens if a project goes bust? What happens when that money has to be paid back either through a loan guarantee through the government or, again, through the financing by the taxpayer? Won't taxpayers end up holding the bag then in that case, especially if they're not regulated at the same level as Canadian insurance companies and banks?
So again, this is a separate kind of institution. So the projects that we're talking about will be projects that investors will come in to invest in because they will see the business opportunity there. They'll see the business opportunity because there'll be an opportunity for perhaps their pensioners who could well be Canadians who are invested in a pension fund, that those opportunities will be there for those streams of income. If, for example, there was a project in which one particular investor, for some reason or another, didn't stay involved in that project, the continuing business attributes of the investment would be there, meaning that it would still be possible for another investor to come in and take their position.
But again, there'll be two separate forms of rules. One where the taxpayer ends up holding the bag, while the other one you have a very tightly regulated, where there's capital put in place. And so I just disagree with that kind of thinking, Minister. We should be encouraging Canadians to be investing in Canada. I'd like just to quickly move into excise duties.
The nature of what we're trying to do here.
Minister,
and just to
are
be
you
clear,
aware that the excise duties on wine have increased by 125% since 1980, and that the new measures that you're proposing will basically be 2% per year forever? Now, that's going to take a lot of investment out of wineries right across this great country, but also microbrewers and breweries and spirits. They are very, very subject to or sensitive to excise changes. Minister, have you done any work to see what that will do to the jobs and the investment? Because this country right now, we are at the lowest levels of business investment since 1981. So, Minister, have you done the homework when it comes to this particular sector and how sensitive it is, considering they pay all the other taxes? And by the way, excise ends up provincially as well as federally. Then you add the GST or HST, depending on where you're making it. So, Minister, there's going to be increases right across the board. Have you done the homework?
Let me come back to the first part of your comment to again say that the Canada Infrastructure Bank, on a project-by-project basis, will seek outside investors, and that is exactly what we hope to do in order to increase the amount of infrastructure investment that goes on in this country. The advantage will be that we will have outside investors that will allow us to do more, and that is entirely separate and distinct from banking or insurance company regulation, and the two should not in any way be confused. With respect to the decision to not allow excise tax to decline over time, we've decided that what we will do is to ensure that inflation, which occurs in our economy, as you may know, will be able to be considered because the excise taxes will be subject to inflation like other aspects of our economy are subject to inflation. So that, we believe, is an approach that will just be long-term positive in order to provide predictability around those excise taxes over time.
Excise are ad valorem, so at the price of the wine goes up because of inflationary reasons, it's going to continue to do that. I just disagree with that, and I don't think his department has done the homework, Mr. Chair.
We'll give you a minute later to follow that line of thought. Mr. Greywald. We're substantially over time in that round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you for being here at committee. You know, sometimes we get into the Ottawa bubble, but it's always nice to go back to the riding, to talk to the people of Brampton East. And, you know, when I get to meet them at events or I go door knocking to talk to them, they're really, really impressed with what our government's doing, especially when it comes to investments, whether it's the kind of the child benefit that's helping families, the middle income tax cut, or our general narrative on tax fairness. And something that resonated in my neck of the woods, especially as a proud son of a taxi cab driver, was the recent change to the tax policy on the definition of taxi. And how we're going to include ride-sharing services so that they also have to now pay DST and HST. Can I just get your thoughts on why we think this is important for all Canadians?
Well, Raj, I want to say that you and a number of other members of Parliament were instrumental in bringing forward this idea. We know that tax fairness is critically important, and in the area of ride-sharing services, we know that it's important that people are looked on an equal playing field. So when we looked at this, we said that for taxis who are sitting side by side an Uber driver, they should be subject to the same level of GST. Your advocacy made a difference. We've moved forward on this. We know that it'll put ourselves in a position where going forward we can allow for new technologies, but it's only going to be done on a fair basis.
Thank you, Minister. And on behalf of all taxi drivers and sons and daughters of taxi drivers, thank you very much for implementing that policy. Moving right along, I mean, we came into power after 10 years of low economic growth, of low job creation, and now with our investments, we're seeing the unemployment rate declining. And you mentioned earlier in your testimony that worker participation is going to increase by having more female participation in the workforce. At the same time, in this budget, we also want to ensure that new Canadians that come to our country in search of the Canadian dream, that have qualifications, that are engineers, that are lawyers, that are doctors, have an opportunity to practice in their professions here in Canada, and the investments that we're making in foreign credential recognition. If you could elaborate on how that's going to not only help those new immigrants settle in this country, but also in terms of economic growth, so we can leverage their skills.
Well, we know this is really important. We bring really talented people to our country, and we want to make sure that they have the ability to be successful here. So many people, and you mentioned taxi drivers, we find ourselves in a situation where people who have a high level of credentials are doing jobs that are significantly less demanding of their skills and talents than they should be. So we've said that we should put money towards ensuring that we help newcomers to be successful here. We've put $27.5 million in budget 2017 over 5 years in order to have a targeted strategy to help newcomers to get themselves credentialed up in Canada, to actually make the most of the real talent that comes to our country. We think this is critically important today and important for the future as we think about how we ensure that our workforce remains dynamic and successful. It's important. We're pleased to be making this initiative, and we think it's going to have a real impact.
Thank you, Minister. And lastly, you know, Brampton is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. It's the 9th largest city today, and its population is 600,000, and it's projected to be 1 million in the next 10 years. So infrastructure is a huge demand in our neck of the woods. So just to correct the record on some of the questions and testimony that's been given today on how the Canada Infrastructure Bank could help a city like Brampton build infrastructure to help Canadians get moving again.
We know that Brampton, like other places across the country, needs to have the kind of infrastructure that will allow people to get back and forth, in the case of Brampton, to downtown Toronto, that will allow people to get back home to their family more rapidly in the evenings. That kind of infrastructure is expensive. We know that the kind of money that we've put for the next dozen years is going to make a really significant dent, especially when we work together with Ontario and with local municipalities. But there will be projects that will provide us with the opportunity to think about even doing more. And that's what the Canada Infrastructure Bank is intended to do. Finding those projects where we can crowd in private sector investors, they can put money to work. It might help all of us who have pensions that are actually being run by those institutional investors, and also help us to have a more productive place, whether it's in Brampton or other places across the country, because of those investments. That's what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you both. Mr. Leipert.
Just before we leave the whole question around this infrastructure outfit, I wanted to just get clarity on a comment you made to my colleague. If I heard you correctly, you indicated the new infrastructure corporation would operate similar to the Export Development Corporation and Business Development Bank, which I believe are both 100% backstopped by the Canadian government. And if that's the case, and there are bad loans in those organizations, then it is in effect the taxpayer that would pick up that bad loan. And so then is that your answer to Mr. Poilievre's question, that if there's a bad loan within this new infrastructure corporation, that it would in fact be the taxpayer that would pick it up?
Mr. Minister.
Well, thank you for the question and the opportunity to clarify. What I said was that this institution would be finding ways to crowd in private sector capital. And among the ways that might be done would be to consider loans and loan guarantees that might allow for projects that might otherwise not be economic to become economic. In the case of each specific project, we expect that the project would have dynamics that would entice investors to be involved in that project, which would mean that there was, in many cases, security for whatever it is that they might have had a loan or a loan guarantee for. So that's important. We do expect that in many cases that won't be necessary, in some it might. Each project will be specific to that project. I expect that what will happen is that the security that might be there might create the opportunity for us to have loans that work to make sure these projects are successful.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit. If my colleague, Mr. Deltel, was here, he would ask one simple question: when are you going to balance the budget?
Mr. Minister.
And if your colleague, Mr. Deltel, was here, I would want to spend time reminding him on how successful our efforts have been to deal with what we saw as a challenging environment when we came into office. Happily, we are seeing a situation where employment has improved in this country, a very positive outcome, I'm sure, across the country, likely in all the ridings that we represent. I'd also point out that
I asked one simple question: when are you going to balance the budget? And you haven't answered it, so I want to go on to the next question.
Okay, well, let's hear your next question.
Okay, the next question is, so I'm looking at Division 2, Part 4, which allows for the borrowing up to $1.3 trillion. Mr. Minister, if my calculations are correct, during your 4 years as Finance Minister, that budget debt will increase by about $80 billion. You comfortable with that being your legacy?
Mr. Minister.
We are very much looking at a legacy of creating success for Canadians and for Canadian families. We know that behind the 250,000 new jobs over the last year that we've created in this country are families that are now being more successful. We know that in each one of those situations they're creating better economic outcomes. We know that to the extent that we can grow the economy more rapidly than it was growing when we came into office because of the lack of investment before, that we can actually find ourselves in a better long-term situation which will improve our economy and as a result improve our fiscal health.
Okay, just to be sure that the record is clear, that when this government took over almost 2 years ago, the budget was balanced. Mr. Minister, you talk about legacy for Canadians. If my math is correct, I think when you're done as Finance Minister, every Canadian will have a legacy of something like at least $17,000 per person owing. Again, are you comfortable with that legacy?
Maybe we can be absolutely clear. When we came into office, what we saw were rosier than expected economic growth forecasts, which led to a conclusion that was erroneous, that we would be successful fiscally over the next number of years. In fact, when we looked at the real outcome, the growth was going to be lower, and therefore, as you know, we have made investments to try and deal with that growth. What Canadians will see as a result of our investments, as a result of our government over time is, as I said, more success for their families, a better situation for the long term, and more positive growth in this country.
That's not correct, Minister. Your own Finance Department released the numbers that said the budget was balanced at the end of that fiscal year. That's all I have, Mr.
Minister, do you want to add further to that?
got the last word.
Okay, then nothing further to add. Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Minister, for being here this afternoon. Mr. Minister, in my former capacity as a local mayor and local member of regional council back in the Niagara region, I recognize the need to, one, expedite municipal projects, and two, equally if not more importantly, to ensure that projects were affordable to local property taxpayers through leveraging. With that, in my current capacity as a member of Parliament, we're working together, all of us, different departments, different ministries, to work toward putting in place these very, and I'll call them enablers. So my question is, do you envision the infrastructure bank, as well as the $180 billion infrastructure investments that the government's prepared to make over the course of the next few years, to act as a mechanism, to act as an enabler, to expedite municipal projects, such as community improvement plans, as well as those that align with government strategies, federal government strategies, such as the trade corridors in certain jurisdictions throughout the nation, while alleviating the financial pressures on our local property taxpayers?
Well, Vance, thanks for that question. I think it's important, especially coming from your background at the municipal level, to know that to the extent we can find projects that are going to make a really big difference in your region that can be funded through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, allowing investors to create returns there, what it will do is allow the local municipalities to make other investments if they choose, or to be in a better financial situation. So that is exactly what we're trying to achieve. If we can do more, it's going to make things better for people in your area. If we can do more in a way that allows the local area to make other investments that are going to be important for residents, that's also critically important.
Well, thank you. And if I can have a second question, Mr. Chairman, as well. When we look at areas such as those that we're trying to help in the middle class, you mentioned earlier about pregnant women and pregnant working women. And what I've heard in the past week or so since announced, great idea, great that those women are going to have 18 versus 12 months now available to them to spend with their child. Also alleviating some pressure on the daycare costs. Is there an opportunity as well to look at those women that are pregnant now and or just getting into their maternity leaves now to take advantage of that possibility within the budget?
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're getting that question, because it means that people are seeing the advantage of the policies that we're putting into place, the flexibility that it's going to create for families, the opportunity that it's going to create for women to have the ability to stay away longer or come back earlier depending on their personal situation. Our answer is we want to move forward with this bill as soon as possible. Our goal is to have this committee review it, to get the bill passed as soon as possible so that we can help more women to have that flexibility sooner. So that's why we want to move forward quickly. With your support, that's what we'll get to, and make a real difference for women and families.
And will you find that if those women are currently now just entering again the system with respect to being on maternity leave for their first month or two, will they have the opportunity as well to tap into that 18 months versus the current 12 months?
Well, we're working towards getting the transition rules done as rapidly as possible. Clearly, moving forward quickly is going to make a difference.
Great, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you both. And to be balanced, Mr. Dussault, you have time for one question, and I told Mr. Albas, because people were talking over each other, we have one question on the Vinters issue. Mr. Dussault.
Merci.
Thank you. Just for a reference, earlier we talked about infrastructure, and when we talked about generating revenue through this, the regional municipalities would like to have some 8%.
As an investor or potential investor, speaking for investors, I would like to know, given that people who were consulted, who were members of the council and consulted when the bank was created, in other words, major players, including BlackRock, the company. In fact, you spoke with BlackRock several times for their advice, and they also worked closely with the Advisory Council, which came up with the suggestion that we go ahead with an infrastructure bank that we're now seeing ready to enact. So given that parties that were clearly involved in conceiving this project and developing it, BlackRock then, involved at so many levels, do you feel that there is any chance that there is a conflict of interest at issue? Companies that are investors, that have money and will likely invest in this bank, were involved in drawing up the plans for the bank and thinking up the bank and so on, and may take advantage of the return on investment of 7 to 9%. Is this a conflict? Thank you. Allow me to begin by explaining that we decided that it was very important to create a council on economic growth made up of people who were true experts in this area. It seemed very relevant to consult experts in Quebec, for example, who understand the current situation in Quebec, the economy, and the need for investment in infrastructure. We also held consultations with pension funds, many investors across our great land, institutional investors at the international level as well. All that was very relevant. But of course, each project will be a standalone project in as much that it will be different, have its own characteristics, have a specific level of risk and return on investment. And for each project, decisions about investing in it will be made by the government. It's very important to underscore that we will be making decisions. True, we have held consultations, but when all is said and done, it will be the government governing these projects, these investments, and indeed, we will be choosing projects and how they are structured. And our aim as a government is to have a positive effect on Canada and Canadians across the country with these projects.
Question, if we could, Dan, on the countering positions on excise tax.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, Minister, I was in Nova Scotia, that has the highest amount of microbrewers per capita in Halifax in the country. One of the persons who had started in the industry in the 80s said that back when he had started, there was about 20 or 30 microbreweries. And after the the first budget by the Harper government, Mr. Flaherty put in place excise tax relief. Now there's well over 600 of these microbrewers right across the country. They are also obviously subject to excise tax provincially. And what this does, Minister, is when you add these costs to their structure, in addition to the money that they pay in corporate income tax, in addition to the GST, et cetera, that's generated and the income taxes by all the jobs, you take more money out of excise tax, Minister. You're effectively making it more difficult for them to invest and grow. What do you say to those microbrewers who are, who have just gotten into the market, who have invested their life savings to grow a business, only to find out that many of them may not have the margins that they did to be able to grow?
Thank you, Mr. Albas. Mr. Minister.
Thank you for the question. We know that we need to create a tax system that's fair, a tax system that keeps up with the times. We know that we need to have a system that creates government revenues appropriately, and that is one that creates a predictable and understandable way of dealing with changes in the economy. So by making sure that excise taxes in this sector are changed with the consumer price index, we are just doing what we know is most straightforward to, like with every other thing that we purchase or every other item, we're seeing that inflation is keeping the real value of these excise taxes consistent. So in real terms, for that investor, we're saying that your excise taxes will be consistent over time because as inflation changes, these excise taxes will stay consistent and they won't move in an erratic way unrelated to that factor.
Okay, thank you, Minister. That ends our round. I don't know whether you could assume there won't be questions at question period today because all the answers have been given here or not. I doubt it.
I'll be
Thank you.
waiting with bated breath. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and we'll suspend for a couple of minutes for officials. First up, Part 4, Division 17. Suspended.
Okay, it's going to get us in trouble.
Reconvene, if we could, members, to the table. So we have, if I could find my witness list, where's my witness list with officials? Right here. Too much paper here. With us then to deal with Part 4, District 17 on labour and employment laws, Mr. Advocat and Mr. Rachon. Welcome, folks. I see you cover a lot of about 50 pages in this Budget Implementation Act, so we'll see how long it takes. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, honourable members. My name is Eric Advocat. I'm the Senior Director of the Occupational Health and Safety Division for the Labour Program within Employment and Social Development Canada. I'm here with my colleague Charles-Philippe Rachon, a Senior Analyst. And my area of expertise is really in Part 2 of the Canada Labour Code, which is the occupational health and safety aspect of it. And Charles-Philippe is going to be able to address some of the detailed proposed changes in Part 3, which is really the labour standards portion of the Canada Labour Code. So Division 17 of Part 4, as has been noted by the chair, is a large portion of the Budget Implementation Act. Number 1, it proposes to amend the Canada Labour Code to update the suite of compliance and enforcement tools aimed at deterring non-compliance with occupational health and safety and labour standards requirements. This is to ensure that workers in federally regulated industries suffer fewer accidents and injuries at work, and that they receive the pay and benefits to which they are entitled. It will also consolidate the various adjudicative functions that exist under the code under the Canada Industrial Relations Board. So there's 3 key changes that I'm going to speak to before I turn it over to Charles-Philippe. And these changes will apply both to Part 2, which again is the occupational health and safety aspect of the code, and to Part 3, the labor standards parts of the code. So these 3 amendments are to establish, under a new proposed Part 4 of the code, a system of administrative monetary penalties to promote compliance with occupational health and safety and labor standards requirements. So this would include giving the Governor and Council regulation-making powers to designate violations and determine the associated penalties, up to a maximum of $250,000 per individual violation, and setting out processes for the issuance, review, and appeal of notices of violation. The second is to provide authority to publish information about employers that have been found guilty of an offence or who have violated occupational health and safety or labour standards requirement. So the type of information that could be published would also be spelled out in regulation after consultations with stakeholders, but for instance could include the employer's name, the nature of the violation or offence, and the associated penalty. Information would only be published once all review and appeal processes have been exhausted. The third aspect of the change is to, as I said, consolidate under the Canada Industrial Relations Board the functions of appeals officers under Part 2 and of wage referees and unjust dismissal adjudicators under Part 3 of the Code, as well as the functions of adjudicators under the Wage Earner Protection Program Act. This entails some changes as well to Part 1 of the Code, which speaks to industrial relations, which would be necessary to adjust the Board's powers, duties, and functions. We believe this measure would streamline appeals process, better use existing expertise, and enhance consistency of decisions and promote a timely resolution of issues. So those are the 3 sort of bigger changes that apply to all aspects of the Canada Labour Code, and then there are several others that Charles-Philippe is going to speak to that are proposed to Part 3 of the Code.
Thank you. So several other amendments would be made specifically to Part 3, so labour standards of the Canada Labour Code. And this is in order to ensure that employees can avail themselves of existing labour standards rights and protections and more effectively recover unpaid wages. So more specifically, these amendments will bring a number of changes. So first, it will provide a new recourse mechanism to deal with employer reprisals. So this will allow employees to make a written complaint to the Canada Industrial Relations Board if their employer has engaged in reprisals against them for trying to exercise a labour standards right or providing assistance to an inspector or the Minister of Labour. Secondly, there will be a new power that will permit the Minister of Labour or a delegated official to order an employer to conduct an internal audit and to report within a specified period whether it is in compliance with one or more provisions of Part 3. The employer would also have to indicate what steps have been taken to address any instances of non-compliance as part of the reporting. Il y aura aussi de nouveaux pouvoirs qui seront...
Moreover, new powers will be given to inspectors, including the power to require that employers respect the law and will be able to dictate the measures to be taken to avoid that the problem occur again. They will be able to specify how salaries can be paid and how inspectors will be able to ensure compliance, especially, for example, when an employer does not provide information about the salaries unpaid. As for the payment orders that can be issued by inspectors, an important change will be to extend the periods of time at issue, which will allow for recovery of salaries due and other payments due to employee for up to 2 years before the date of the beginning of a complaint or the beginning of an inspection. And this is a change compared to the current standard, which allows one to go back for 1 year. So we're basically doubling the period at issue.
Will provide for the issuance of a notice of voluntary compliance where an employer has voluntarily paid to an employee amounts found owing by an inspector during an investigation. And this will be without the need for a payment order. So by allowing the issuance of a notice of voluntary compliance, this will open the current review and appeal mechanism for employees who may believe they are actually owed more wages than what was assessed by the inspector. Changes will be made to allow the recovery of unpaid wages stated in payment order by ordering any person indebted to a director of a corporation, for example, the Directors Bank, to pay amounts owing directly to the Minister of Labour, which can then be dispersed to the affected employees. This will be an expansion of an existing power that allows for debtors of employers to be asked to provide any amounts due. New administrative fees would be imposed on payment orders, and these administrative fees would be equal to the greater of $200 or 15% of the amounts due. So these administrative fees would apply to payment orders issued to an employer, not payment orders to a director. Moreover, these administrative fees would be reimbursed to the employer if a payment order is subsequently rescinded on review or appeal. And in addition to that, with the consent of the Minister of Labour, employers and directors of a corporation will be given the option to provide a security as opposed to a cash payment if they seek to have a payment order reviewed or appealed. This will give a bit more flexibility to employers who in some cases may have difficulty putting the full amount together. So all of the proposed enforcement tools under the code can be found in other labour jurisdictions in Canada and other countries, so we're not reinventing the wheel here. And the proposed amendments will come into force by order in council. So this is expected to be done on a staggered basis over the coming 36-month period after roll is set. And this will provide time for consultations with stakeholders to develop the required regulatory amendments. So we are aware, for example, for administrative monetary penalties, we will need to set all of that out in regulations. And it will also give time to design, develop, and educate employers, employees, and others on the new compliance and enforcement regime. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you both. Turning to questions, I have first Mr. Sabera and then Mr. Dussault.
I have a clarification question, and this is more of an educational question for myself. These amendments apply to federally regulated workforces, not outside of that sphere, correct?
That's correct. And perhaps it should be clarified that Part 2, which is occupational health and safety, applies to federally regulated employees in the private sector as well as the public service, whereas Part 3 does not apply to the public service. There's other legislation that applies to them for labor standards provisions.
Okay. And then a question, excuse me, I'm just flipping through my notes here, and hopefully I didn't lose where I wanted to ask a question here. Oh, okay. One of the questions I'm just curious about is the what is the rationale for proposing to add an administrative fee issued against the employer under payment orders? I think that's the $250,000 fee that you referred to, or is that another fee?
Actually, it's a $200 fee, not
okay.
$200,000, just to be absolutely clear.
That's the clarification.
Yes.
Thank you.
So basically the rationale, the objective here is to improve compliance and to encourage employers who actually owe wages to their employees to pay up as early as possible. So we are aware that there have been circumstances where certain employers, perhaps more unscrupulous, would actually try to delay the process and therefore wait for a payment order to be issued and then ask for their full review, appeal, et cetera, which can take quite a bit of time. So the objective here is, again, to create an incentive so that if employers actually do owe wages, that they pay them up after or as soon as possible after the investigation by the inspector. So before a payment order has to be issued. Now, that said, we do recognize that there may be reasons why employers in some cases disagree with the assessment of an inspector, and therefore, if they wish to have the payment order reviewed and appealed and successfully appeal it so that it is rescinded, then no administrative fees will be owed by the employer.
Okay. And just one kind of sort of follow-up, and I'm thinking about federally regulated sectors, say the airline industry being one of them. These sets of changes make the system more efficient, less bureaucratic for both employers and employees?
Yes, the objective is to be much more effective at recovering wages. So part of the issue is how quickly can we recover wages that are owed to employees. So rather than have a process that really is very long and onerous. And so it is to improve effectiveness. This is not a money-making scheme in that sense. So it's really to improve compliance and ensure that employees receive what is owed.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Mr. Dussault and then Mr. Albas.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here at committee with us. You said that once this bill gets royal assent, most of the clauses will come into force some 36 months after royal assent is given, because you want to carry out consultations and especially inform the people who will be affected by this new legislation, employers and employees. But my question is more about what went on before these changes in C-44 were brought to us, the consultations with employers and employees and unions, because these are, sizable adjustments and changes being brought to the Labour Code that will certainly have a real impact. So how much consultation was offered and held before these changes were suggested? And how long has this work been underway, and how much consultation then? Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. We held 2 rounds of consultation, the most recent having been in January. Many of the key parties interested in this area, representatives of employers as well as employees. We speak with the Canadian Labour, Congress, and federally regulated employees in the transportation and communications sector. So we held discussions with them in January. Also, between May and June of 2016, we held another set of discussions focusing on the changes to be brought to Part 3.
Stakeholders have been focused on the administrative monetary penalties regime, and they have wanted to make sure that we don't immediately use AMPs to punish accidental non-compliance. So we have a regime that we use that starts with education and awareness raising, moves to voluntary compliance measures, counseling measures, and then on to orders and directions, which may or may not immediately have administrative monetary penalties associated with them. So their comments have been to ensure, they would like to ensure that we continue to use that sort of scale so that employers that are unintentionally non-compliant don't immediately get hit with an administrative monetary penalty. So that has been really the focus of their remarks to date.
Merci pour cette information-là.
Thank you for that information. My second question: how comparable is this to the labor standards applied in the provinces, where most employees, well, certainly across Canada, fall under provincial jurisdiction? So how comparable is this to what goes on there? The rules, of course, are sometimes different, and it becomes complicated for Canadians to really understand what applies to them in the workforce. So how comparable are these new rules with the labour rules in the provinces? Thank you very much for that question. As you know, each province and territory in Canada covers a different region and has a different set of laws, but there is much similarity across them. Now, we analysed this situation, and all the measures being put forth here for the budget implementation law, especially in Division 17, are measures that exist elsewhere in Canada. So this isn't really all that novel in that sense. There are examples of these measures elsewhere. Are they everywhere in all provinces and territories? Are they applied across the board? No. But as for the administrative monetary penalties, for example, we know that similar measures are applied statutorily in Alberta, in the Alberta Labour statutes, Nova Scotia, Ontario, Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario. So several provinces and territories use this type of scheme. Now, in order to be, as for naming non-compliant employers, that too is found in some jurisdictions. And this was actually a situation where the federal approach was lagging behind. So we'll be catching up. I won't get into all the details or too many examples, but we certainly analyzed what was being done in the provinces and territories to ensure that our protections were at least similar to what's available to employees under provincial and territorial law. Thank you.
Mr. Albas, we'll not get to District 2020, Division 2021, 13 and 14 before question periods, that's for sure. We will hopefully get to those shortly after 6 tonight. So those that are sitting here and wait, you needn't wait. You can go do whatever else you got to do until 6 o'clock. Mr. Albas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly thank you, the officials, for your presence today and your explanation of what you do for Canadians. So I'd like just to ask, in this particular division, is there a privatative clause that limits the judicial review of this new system?
Yes.
So can you explain maybe to members of Parliament and the Canadian public what a privatative clause does and what's intended to do?
Thanks for those who are leaving for your endurance. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
So just to give a bit of context, so there are privative clauses, and there have been in the past in the Canada Labour Code such clauses. And the objective is to ensure that existing adjudicative functions under the code are not, to the extent possible, challenged unduly in courts. So essentially what they do, they don't prevent entirely a judicial review of a decision of an adjudicator or referee or the Osh Tribunal, or once everything is transferred, the Canada Industrial Relations Board. What it does mean, however, is that any court should give a fairly high degree of deference to any decision made by the Administrative Tribunal. So in this case, the Canada Industrial Relations Board or any of the other bodies before the transfer is done.
Yeah, it's just as long as the board is operating along the principles of judicial, or I should say, procedural fairness, and then obviously by the principles of natural justice, then it wouldn't be, this would not preclude someone from taking action if it was found the board did not operate on either of those two.
It does not preclude, and right now there is, obviously the Canada Industrial Relations Board already has a number of powers under Part 1 of the Code. There is a privative clause there, but that does not prevent somebody from challenging a decision, and that's been done at times successfully in the past. Okay. So that will not change.
Second question, is there a minimum or maximum claim through this system?
Just to clarify, do you mean for claim for unpaid wages?
Yes.
So basically, there is no maximum in terms of amounts. However, there is a maximum period that can be covered, and this is what will actually be changing. So if somebody files a complaint for unpaid wages, and let's assume the person is still employed with the employer, it will be possible to look back in time up to 2 years from the date of the complaint for any wages that were not paid during that period. So from that perspective, if, let's say, there were $5,000 in unpaid wages, overtime, vacation pay, etc., within that 2-year period, it would be possible to recover that amount. So there's
what is the current?
Currently, it is possible to go back 12 months or up to 24 months for vacation pay. So what changes now is that it will be 24 months for any wages or other amounts provided for under Part 3.
Okay, just to ask, following up Mr. Duclos, what his questioning is that similar to provincial regulation, or is that standalone, separate from the rest of the provinces?
It is basically going to bring our standards, they will be more similar to Ontario's. So several jurisdictions have put certain limits in terms of time period that can be covered by payment orders. So it will make it more generous than it was before in terms of recovering wages, but it would be, I would say, within the norm of provincial legislation.
Okay, but there's still a certainty for employers, and they are going to be, as you said, not only consulted, but also I'm sure there'll be some education materials about the new system, how it works, how they can protect their rights as well.
Oh, absolutely. We need to make sure that everybody is well aware of the obligations, and I should perhaps mention as well that there will be transitional provisions so that we don't, basically things will apply as of the date of coming into force. We're not going to go back in time and penalize somebody for something on which they had no knowledge that they had particular obligations.
So the day of coming into force, is that by an order in council?
It will be by order in council. At this point, different provisions could come into force on different dates. So that's why it may be done on a staggered basis over a 36-month period. We expect that probably the last amendments to come into force would be those related to administrative monetary penalties, just because of the complexity of setting up such a regime.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, thank you both for your clarity on what is a fairly complicated issue. So we will adjourn until 3:30 in the meeting room across the hall. Meeting adjourned.